Hey everyone, this is a quick little side video about how we can get GitHub to work way easier for our projects. Um, for a bit of transparency on why it was so difficult so far, was that the initial attempts I had made to do it this way, with the old-fashioned command line approach, works fine if you know Git pretty well, but the impression I had gotten was that if you weren't super duper familiar with Git, it would probably be more natural to try and do it through some sort of automated-ish kind of system, like the Git for Unity plugin we had tried to do. Turns out that, along with the 2 or 3 other attempts we made after, all those attempts were meant to be easy, and then they all backfired, because people had issues with them, I had issues with them, they weren't consistent. I think we all know it was kind of a train wreck. So, this is a much easier approach. So, this is kind of a clever workaround, sort of. It's something that I tend to do when I set up Git repos, and I just didn't really realize that it's kind of, not cheating the system, but it feels like it kind of is when you're doing it. The idea is, I'm going to make a new repo on my account here. I'm just going to call it something like Git Unity Test, something easy. The thing that makes this really easy is you can use an add.gitignore option here, and they actually have templates for all sorts of things, including Unity. Which means now we don't have to deal with creating a gitignore, downloading it and finding it, getting it to recognize it properly. File types were kind of annoying. This is also, for the record, I haven't tried this on a Mac because I don't have a Mac, so you could store it into issues here, but a common issue on Mac seemed to be that having a file that was literally just .gitignore was seemingly a bit of a kind of just annoyance. I'm not sure how you deal with hidden files and weird things like that on Macs. So hopefully this will just work, but... So, we're going to make an empty repo and just add a Unity template gitignore here. Not going to add any readme, going to make it public, just leave it pretty much all as default, aside from that. What that makes here is just a brand new blank repo that only has a gitignore file in it. And you'll see it's the exact same file as what I uploaded to Blackboard. And if you're not familiar with gitignore, these are just formats for deciding which paths in a project to ignore. Hence the name gitignore. So when we have these brackets, or the square braces like this for L and lowercase l, that's saying either. So that means if you renamed your library folder to be lowercase l, it would still match. And that would mean it would get ignored. The idea is that the library folder, temp, obj, build, etc., generally those are going to have a massive amount of small files and potentially large files. They're all things that don't strictly need to be included in GitHub for a repo. Or for a project, rather. The only things we actually need are the straight-up direct things that need to be there in order to run the project. Because the library folder and the temp folder, those are all things that will automatically regenerate when you load a project. So even if you delete the project off your computer, and then you clone a copy of it back down to re-download it that way, all the folders that are missing are ones that will regenerate. So you might have to wait a couple extra minutes for it to re-import things the first time you reopen it, but it does mean that you no longer have to store 10,000 files of the library stuff on GitHub, which significantly increases the size of the repo. It makes GitHub complain quite a bit about number of files, and when you have a lot of small files, it just gets all weird. So we're better off ignoring those. The rest of this template file are just other related things that are safe to ignore. You can just leave it as is. There may be potential problems down the road if you start doing larger projects. I remember I had to edit the gitignore a bit on my previous projects. If that's relevant and it comes up, we can deal with it when we get there. This is fine for now. So, what we need to do now is we need to have a way to link this repo that exists on github.com to link to the project that we have on our computer. So what I did down here was I opened the project from the most recent video series that we did, just about the skeleton attacking another skeleton. And so we took that, and what we can do is we can view that folder here. This is in just on my external SSD, it's just the folder view. It should be the same kind of setup you have. It is worth noting that the gitignore is matching specifically this structure, where at the very base of the project we have library, temp, obj. Here I have library, obj, temp, logs, all these things. If your folder structure for your project has all of this inside of another folder, like project here, and everything is inside there, the gitignore will not match it. Because we're matching specifically the folders at the top level of the project here. So you need to make sure you leave your project either as default, or you would have to change the gitignore to match the different paths that you set up. Much easier to just leave it as is like this, and don't edit too much. So, what we can do from here is, you can open git bash, and as long as you have GitHub, or rather Git in general, installed, that should have came with git bash. And git bash is basically just a terminal kind of GUI sort of setup for GitHub, similar to command prompt, or I think terminal, I think it is in Mac. But it kind of natively comes in with more Git controls. When you open it, you can navigate using CD for change directory, and you can go kind of one layer at a time to find your folder. Alternatively, you can also right-click within the folder, and you should get a prompt for git bash here. And on my other monitor, that opened up a prompt that was already git bashing at this directory here. Same idea either way. Once we're here, we can take the link to the .git file for our project, which is always going to be just the URL followed by .git, I believe is always the pattern. You can always also click code and copy it here. I'm going to say git clone. Maybe you can't paste it. This way. What we have is cloning git unity test. And so what we can see here is we have this folder now called git unity test, which is the name of the repo from on here. We had git unity test, and it placed a new folder called git unity test in the project here. The reason we do this is we can now take inside here, we have a .git and a .gitignore folder and file here. Those are what we need. So we can take those, I'm going to cut them, paste them out here, and you can get rid of the git unity test. And now what we have is the main project view within Unity, and it has the .git folder. And the .git folder is what links this project off to all of the remote headings and tail files and all sorts of stuff that exist on GitHub's end that tell it this directory is linked to that repo that exists at that URL for this user. So now, if we go into here, you can now actually see it once I hit clear, it kind of refresh the view of this. It's now showing in blue, it says main. That is its way of recognizing that this is now a valid Git repository. We do git status. You should see that that should be the view you get, as long as your project looks like mine. You should have only assets, packages, project settings, user settings, maybe one or two others if your project has them. You shouldn't see library, obj, logs, temp, etc. You shouldn't see any of the things within the gitignore shown here in red. So the red is saying that these are files that are not being tracked by GitHub yet. So these are things that we'd have to add. So we're saying add these to our repo, so that way we can then modify and keep track of our changes to them. So what you can do is you can either add each directory one at a time, or one file at a time, or you can just do git add dot. And you can see that's going through everything. You do git status again, you'll see we get a massive list of all of the individual files that are now being tracked. Mostly that is the assets folder. You can see this is the skeleton model if we look through. The assets folder has the skeleton model, it has the scenes, scripts, the text mesh pro folder. And that's like 90% of it. The rest of it is 2 files in the packages folder, and the rest in the project settings folder. So now we have everything tracked, and we can say git commit. And at least on my system, what that does is it opens up a default editor. In my case, it's Notepad++. I'm not sure what that does for people who don't have it set up. It will probably give you just some sort of prompt to type in the text for your commit. So I'm going to do that here and just say, example for video. Control S to save it. Once you close it, we then get this finishing, and it says we have now committed all of these changes. So as a refresh, when we're doing git commit means that we're saying, I have made these changes at this time by this user on this project. But just doing that only saves the commit on the local copy of our project here. We refresh the GitHub repo here, nothing has gone up here yet. That's because we have locally said that we've committed these changes, and they've happened, but we haven't pushed them onto GitHub yet. We have not uploaded them. That is where the next step comes in, which is to say, git push. You can see it's ticking up one at a time. You can see that looks like it brought up, I'm assuming this is probably file numbers, maybe 202. If you look at your old projects, a lot of you had, I think, thousands of files sometimes, or at least a couple hundred in your projects, because it wasn't properly ignoring everything fully. But so once that's done, you can refresh here, and now we have our project here. We have assets, packages, project settings, and user settings. And we have exactly the view that we had within our project view. And we didn't modify the project at all. We're saying to git ignore these files, but that doesn't mean they're deleted. They still exist locally, it's just when it comes time to actually do commit and git changes, they get ignored, as far as this is concerned, because they don't strictly need to be on GitHub. So we can still use our project as is. Again, nothing has been modified. You can still do the same as before. It works exactly the same. The interesting thing is when you reclone this project. I'm going to do cd ... which is going to bring us back up one level here. You can see I have a directory for video projects for things like this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to reclone this project now that we have everything on there. Say git clone. I think it was shift insert look like? No, definitely not. Okay. What is shift insert? That didn't really seem like it wanted to work, but okay. There, git clone. I'm going to clone it here, so now we have a new folder copy of this. I'm going to go back out here, git unity test. So you can see this project only has exactly what was on GitHub. Asset, packages, project settings, etc. It doesn't have the library, it doesn't have the OBJ, the temp, all that. But I'm going to go to GitHub, or Unity Hub, and we're going to open that. And you'll see what I mean here most likely. This will probably take a few minutes. It's on my other monitor. There. You can see it has to go through these steps of package manager, resolving packages. It's probably going to have a couple other things to do. I'm finding that generally if you ever have that prompt comes up where it says busy for 15 seconds, 18 seconds, etc., that's usually because it has to re-import a bunch of things. Usually once the project is saved and it's working fine, it's probably not going to do this for you and it'll open pretty quickly. So this is a sign that something was missing in the project that had to be regenerated. In fact, you can see here it's doing a bunch now. com.unity.insert file name here. These are all things that are just being re-imported or regenerated because Unity recognized this stuff is missing, but we can regenerate them, and we can make them for you again. You just have to wait a couple minutes. So, realistically, this will not be relevant. If you're doing this all on one computer all the time, you're probably not going to need to just delete the project and reclone it. But it is useful if you're working on different computers. So if you are working sometimes on your computer at home, and sometimes on your laptop, that initial time you're going to need to clone it to both of them, and then they'll be able to stay updated. And if you ever make changes to the repo, you would need to do the other git commands, like git pull or git fetch. Those are other things you can learn. Maybe I'll do a future video on that if you're feeling shaky on it, but the impression I got is most of you have used git before, so I don't think we probably need those extensive details. But we can see here, once it opened up, you see it went to an untitled scene, but if we go to the sample scene here, we're back to normal. We can play the project. Everything that was necessary to regenerate, regenerated fine, and the code still works the exact same. So with that in mind, you should be able to get Project 2 uploaded with proper git ignore status. I'm trying not to be too picky on it, but at the same time this is pretty important once you get to the group projects. Because you can imagine with a scaled up kind of situation, we're going to have reasonable sized groups. We're not going to be 2 or 3 people, it'll be probably 4 or 5 people per group, I'm guessing. And you're going to have multiple people making changes to multiple parts of your projects, probably all at once. If you organize things well and you get a schedule in place, maybe you can avoid some conflicts that way. But GitHub is really the only effective way to actually store code on a project being done by multiple people like that. So this is a pretty necessary thing to get working for everyone on the team right away from the start. Maybe that's what we'll spend next week on. Really make sure that part is set up, so that way later on, all you have to do is just commit and push your changes. And then make sure that you're not committing stuff while someone else is doing it. Because you can handle that when it happens, but it's a pain in the neck. But the initial setup, we can treat Project 2 as kind of like a trial run for that. So hopefully this video is helpful for that. If you are on a Mac or on Linux and none of this works for you, let me know. I can try to figure out an option for that. I don't have a Mac or Linux, so I can't really do a whole lot of testing on my own. But I can at least look around and see if we can find people who do know how to do it well.